In this lesson, I'm going to be taking you through my name storming process to help you choose the right name for your brand. The most important thing to remember when picking a name is not to let it get in the way of what you're trying to do. It's very easy to fixate on getting the name perfect, and as we know, perfection is a myth. So by the end of this lesson, it's going to be time to move forward and choose a name for your brand. At the same time, it's important to come up with a name that you're really happy with because you're going to be using this every day for the foreseeable future. If you don't select a name that you're happy with, you'll likely regret it later. So let's work on choosing the right name for your brand. Your brand name is always going to be one of the first ways that somebody interacts with your brand, so you need to really consider what people are going to associate your name with. What are some of the things that'll come to mind when they hear the name of your brand? These are also referred to as connotations, and they can be positive or negative. It will definitely help to ask some people from your target audience this question. We spoke earlier about the importance of building a positive association with your brand, and your name is often going to be the first place that this happens. So you want to pick a name that has positive connotations or is fairly neutral. So let's get started now. For me, naming is a really exciting process because it helps bring your brand to life in your mind. It's so much easier to work towards something that has a name, and if you choose the right name, it's going to really complement your brand. So when thinking about a name, first up, let's have a broad think around what a name should or shouldn't be. Love and Money gave the following criteria for this, and they said that a name should be easy to remember, distinct, pique interest, make sense, and be open to change and development. A name should not try to tell the whole story, be too literal, box you in, steal the show, or slow things down. So with that criteria in mind, let's have a think about some of the different categories that a name can fall under. So the first is the literal or generic name like hotels.com or cars.com. I wouldn't choose these unless you already own the domain and the trademark, which is very unlikely, so let's keep moving. The second is the descriptive name, like All Brand Cereal, Europe Car, National Australia Bank, or even Skinny Me Tea. I'll talk a little later about the pros and cons of Skinny Me Tea's name in particular. The third category is my personal favourite, the associative or suggestive name, like Drop Bottle, Skin Tox, The Fifth, or big brands like Apple, which was a random choice, Uber, which means above in German, or super colloquially, and Nike, who is the Greek goddess of victory. And the fourth is the coined random or abstract name, like Kodak, Xerox, or Google. While these names are a blank slate, they'll be harder to remember for a customer and harder to build brand recognition around, so I personally wouldn't choose one of these names. So let's go back into a little more detail on the categories that I've used for my brands, which are descriptive in the case of Skinny Me Tea, and associative or suggestive in the case of The Fifth, Drop Bottle, and Skin Tox. Descriptive brand names can be great as they make it very clear what your product is, but they can also limit you or box you into a certain category. For example, it'd be harder for me to sell a meal replacement shake on Skinny Me Tea's website unless it contained tea extracts maybe. When I was thinking of a name for Skinny Me Tea, I knew that one of the main marketable effects of the tea was weight loss, so I chose the word skinny. And I wanted it to be inclusive, so I chose the word me, and then the descriptive word tea, and it all just sounded right together. Skinny Me Tea. At the same time, I've had troubles with the name since then, especially around the choice of the word skinny. Some people would see the name and think that our brand message is that everybody needs to be skinny, and that's definitely not the case at all. It's actually been a little bit controversial in the media because of the name. The truth is that the word skinny was just far more acceptable back in 2012 when I named the brand. And I also thought it was fine because of names like Skinny Milk or Skinny Martini, for example. So I learnt the hard way that you really do need to think of the wider implications of the name that you're choosing. I obviously didn't know that Skinny Me Tea would become the success it was. And so when I was choosing the name, I didn't really think, what if the media picks this up? I was more thinking, that's what I'm happy to call it to my friends and family, so why not? At the same time, that controversial name could have attributed to our success. It was contrarian and also very obvious exactly what the product did, and that's why I like descriptive names. It often makes your marketing and messaging simpler. Something important to note here is the difference between your product name and your brand name. So your name doesn't need to be too descriptive. You don't need to tell them exactly how to feel about your product or what it does, just give them a sense. That's why I find suggestive names the best option. They're not so descriptive that they box you in, but they're still suggestive of the value that your brand adds to people's lives or representative of your brand values. I also think they make your customer feel smart when they connect the dots, and they make things easier for you in terms of your brand's tone of voice. Like I said, the fifth is an associative or suggestive name. When it came to naming the fifth, I was in New York at the time and I'd just been to Fifth Avenue, so it was just one of the first things that came to mind. I liked that Fifth Avenue was such an iconic fashion location and that the name was so tangible that I could use it in a lot of ways. I liked that it was numerical and time is very numbers based, so I instantly started thinking around calling our blog 5 o'clock and the fifth view, which I turned into the theme for our Instagram account before we launched. So the fifth view was a bird's eye perspective or a view from above. So think about how else you could use your name. At the fifth, we later used our name to rework our entire brand experience after selling out on our first day of sales. As you know, we moved to selling on the fifth for just 5 days a month. So that shows just how useful a flexible but tangible name can be. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Steve Jobs by any means, but he came up with the name Apple in a very similar way. He'd recently visited an apple farm and he thought that the name sounded fun-spirited and not intimidating. Another thing to think about when coming up with a name is whether it can be used as an adjective as well as a noun. For example, Uber, and how you can Uber somewhere. Like I could say, I Ubered to dinner last night. Or Frank Body is another really great example, which is my sister's coffee scrub company. Basically, they're a noun, which is Frank, a guy's name, and that's had a lot to do with their tone of voice as well. They speak in first person, using a seductress brand persona. However, frank is also another word, an adjective, meaning honest or humble, and they call themselves a humble coffee scrub. This helped them come up with the tagline, "Let's be frank," which is one of their hashtags on Instagram as well. One last thing I really love in a name is when it can have a double meaning. Like when we were coming up with the name for a swim short company that I was advising. The central UVP of the brand was shorts that can take you from beach to bar, or shorts that you swim in. These are a little more formal than the average board short, kind of like a board short meets a pair of chino shorts. The shorts had a tailored cut, so we chose to call the brand Taylor, with a Y, like the guy's name. So as an action item for this lesson, let's get into the name storming process itself. So the first thing that you need to do is get out a sheet of paper and then do what I call a word dump and write down every single word that comes to mind when you're thinking about your brand. I think of descriptive words around my brand and product, or its function and effects, and the value that my product adds to people's lives. So let's have a look through some of the assets that you've already created for your brand, mainly your PSSP framework, your lean canvas, and your brand pyramid. Think around the problem your brand is solving, your solution, your UVPs, as well as your brand vision, values, and benefits. You need to appeal to your target audience and be able to take on other attributes of your brand, like your brand personality. This sounds like a lot, but that's a good thing because it means you're going to be able to come up with a few options. Ideally, I want you to come up with at least 15 words in your word dump. These can also be really useful to keep in mind for your overall brand communications as well. You can use these words as a starting point to come up with some different content ideas for your brand, for social media posts, for example. It's important not to get too stuck here, so just set a timer for 5 minutes and write down every word that comes to mind in relation to your product, its benefits, how it makes people feel, and anything else that pops into your head. Once you finish your word dump, I want you to pick out some of your favourite words, maybe around 5 to 10, and head to thesaurus.com and follow them down the rabbit hole. So when it comes time to choosing a name, ultimately you're going to need a minimum of 3 to 5 different names, because unfortunately your first choice might be taken by another brand or company, which can even be the case with your second or even third choice. So it's a good idea to come up with 3 to 5 different names. Don't get too attached to the name until you find out that you can actually use it. Finally, once you have some ideas, check out that they meet the good brand name guidelines I spoke about earlier. It may take a little bit of time to let it mull over and see what you really like, but this should kickstart the process and help you get some great ideas down for a brand name on paper. So go ahead and get started on this process now, and I'll see you in the next lesson.
The Foundr mission is to help you create an ass-kicking business and help you learn straight from the mouths of world-class founders. Get your free printed edition of Foundr magazine featuring Sir Richard Branson. Just cover shipping and handling at foundr.com/Branson.